They called her Trainee until someone whispered her call sign. And the entire platoon fell silent like they'd just seen a ghost walk into the room. It started on a Tuesday morning at Forward Operating Base Valor, somewhere along the dusty edge of nowhere. The new intake class had just arrived. 18 fresh soldiers still smelling like boot polish and nervousness. Among them stood a woman who looked no older than 23. Her uniform crisp but slightly too big around the shoulders. Her boots still unscuffed. She carried herself quietly, almost too quietly, like someone trying hard not to be noticed. The others joked around her, throwing elbows and making bets about who'd break first during drills. She said nothing. She just stood there, eyes forward, jaw set, waiting, before I tell you what happened next. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Staff Sergeant Marcus Holley didn't notice her. First, he was too busy barking orders, his voice cutting through the desert heat like a blade. He was the kind of NCO who believed respect was earned through volume and endurance. When he finally walked past her, he stopped, looked her up and down. Then he smirked. "You look lost, kid," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Reception. Tense that way if you're looking for admin work. A few of the guys chuckled. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Just kept her eyes locked straight ahead, like he wasn't worth the effort of a response. That seemed to irritate him more. "What's your name, Trainee?" "Morgan, Staff Sergeant." "Morgan what?" "Just Morgan." He leaned in closer, his breath hot and sour. "You think this is some kind of game? You think you can just show up here and... Staff? Sergeant Holley." The voice came from behind them, deep, calm, laced with authority that didn't need to shout. Holley turned to see Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Cross standing at the edge of the formation, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Cross wasn't a tall man, but he had the presence of someone who'd seen things most people only had nightmares about. "A word?" Cross said. It wasn't a request. Hale's face tightened, but he followed. The two men stepped away, just far enough that their conversation became a low murmur lost beneath the wind. But those who were watching saw Hale's posture change, saw his shoulders drop, saw him glance back at Morgan with something new in his eyes, something that looked a lot like fear. When Holley returned, his voice had lost its edge. "Fall in," he said quietly. "All of you." The rest of that morning passed in a strange, tense silence. Drills were run, orders were given, but Holley never looked at Morgan again. And when lunch came, the whispers started. "Who is she? Why'd the colonel pull Holley like that?" You see the way he looked at her after? No one had answers, but everyone had questions. It wasn't until later that afternoon, during a tactical briefing, in the operations tent, that the truth began to unravel. Cross was addressing the senior staff when Captain Lita Torres, one of the few women in leadership at the base, leaned over to her colleague and muttered something under her breath. The officer next to her went pale. "Wait, that Morgan." Torres nodded slowly. The name spread like wildfire. By dinner, half the base knew. By nightfall, everyone did. Morgan wasn't a trainee dot. She was a legend, 3 years earlier, in a place no one was supposed to talk about. A small reconnaissance unit had been pinned down by enemy fire in a valley so narrow the shadows never left. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. Command had written them off. Extraction was impossible. Survival was a prayer no one believed in anymore, until Desert Serpent arrived. That was her call sign. Not because she was ruthless, but because she moved like something the desert itself had borne. Silent, precise, and impossible to predict. She'd flown a helicopter through a sandstorm that had grounded every other pilot on the continent. Flew it blind, using nothing but instinct, and a GPS system held together with duct tape and a mechanic's prayer. She'd landed in a clearing no bigger than a basketball court. Under fire, rotors screaming, sand tearing through the air like shrapnel. She pulled out 14 soldiers that day. 14 men and women who had minutes left to live. She made 3 trips, each one more dangerous than the last. On the final run, Her bird took so much damage it barely limped back to base. When she climbed out of the cockpit, her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't undo her harness. But her face was stone. She never spoke about it, never wore the medals they tried to give her. She requested a transfer, cited personal reasons, and disappeared into the bureaucracy of reassignment paperwork. Command let her go quietly. Heroes, after all, rarely want to be reminded of things that made them heroic. But someone always remembers Dot by the time morning formation. Rolled around the next day, the entire base had changed. Soldiers who'd ignored her now stood a little straighter when she passed. Holly, for his part, avoided her entirely. And when Cross called her into his office that afternoon, the base held its breath. She thought she'd get reprimanded. Thought, maybe. She'd be reassigned again, sent somewhere even quieter. She was wrong. Cross didn't sit behind his desk. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the wind move across the sand. You didn't have to come back, he said quietly. No. So why did you? She was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Because running doesn't change what happened, and hiding doesn't make you forget. Cross turned to face her. His eyes were tired, but kind. You're not here as a trainee, Morgan. You're here as an instructor. Flight operations. Search and rescue. I want you teaching the next generation how to do what you did. Not the heroics, the discipline, the focus, the part that kept you alive. She blinked. Sir, you don't have to decide now, he said. But you should know. The people here already look up to you, whether you wear the medals or not. That evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Morgan stood on the tarmac near the helicopter hangars. The wind tugged at her jacket. Behind her, she could hear the rhythmic chant of a unit running drills. Somewhere in the distance, a radio crackled with coordinates and call signs. She closed her eyes, breathed in the dust and heat and gasoline, felt the weight of the sky above her Dot, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel like she was running anymore. 2 weeks later, she stood in front of her first class. 32 faces stared back at her, some skeptical, some curious, some already worshipful. She didn't tell them war stories, didn't talk about the valley or the storm or the 14 lives. She taught them how to read the wind, how to trust their instruments when their eyes lied, how to stay calm when everything inside them screamed to panic Dot. And at the end of the session, one of the younger pilots raised his hand. Ma'am, is it true about Desert Serpent? She looked at him for a long moment, then she smiled, just a little. Call signs are earned, she said, not given. Remember that. Because courage doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It just shows up quietly when it's needed most Dot, and sometimes. The people we underestimate are the ones who've already saved the world. If this story moved you, drop a comment below and let me know what you felt. And if you believe in second chances and quiet heroes, hit that subscribe button because there are so many more stories like this waiting to be told.